Oh,
rather than, and I'm glad there's an
and
alternative.
we are live. Here we go.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Laura and I were catching up, actually. It's Jean Chatzky. This is our Wednesday live. My guest is the fabulous Laura Saunders from the Wall Street Journal. It is tax day. I know it feels so weird to say that in the middle of July, but it is tax day. And thanks to the Alliance for Lifetime Income, our sponsor, we get to have a terrific conversation about taxes with Laura, who I have known for 30 years and haven't seen in a really long time. When I was in my first job as a fact checker at Forbes magazine, Laura was writing about taxes then. She is the best. And I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I have really happy memories of working with you. You had a real grasp of the facts, and I'm sure you still do. And so I have remembered that with pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. That was the best job working at Forbes. I remember and welcome to all the people who are joining us, but I just remember it being described to me before I applied for that job that you are going to go in, you are going to work until 2 a.m, chasing down these facts and these articles, and you are just going to love it. And that was completely and totally true. It was boot camp for reporters, and every reporter should totally go through that.
It was a great place to learn.
Yeah, no question. So tell us all a little bit about what you're doing these days. You're at the Wall Street Journal. You've been there a long time.
Yes, I'm at Forbes for a couple of decades, and I worked my way into a tax specialty. I'm not a tax lawyer or CPA or anything like that. I don't even have an accounting degree, but I found that it's really interesting to write about taxes because they touch all of us, and they touch everything we do: buying houses, paying for education, saving for retirement, having children. It touches every part of us. And so there's always something new to write about that I didn't know. I learn all the time as well. Now, about 12 years ago, almost exactly 12 years ago, I came to the Wall Street Journal to write their tax column known as Tax Report. And this is I think it's the oldest and one of the most popular columns at the Wall Street Journal, because Wall Street Journal readers have a real passion for taxes. And so they want to hear about it all the time, and I'm happy to write about it all the time and cover everything from Swiss accounts to charitable giving, Swiss bank accounts, to charitable giving. And so it's been an extraordinary year for taxes. It's been an amazing time to watch the world go by in the tax code and through the tax code. And so that's what I do and where I am.
So the pandemic, as we all know, and we're getting a lot of people saying hello. Hi to everybody out there who's joining us from LinkedIn and from Facebook. Please let us know what you'd like to hear about, and if you have questions. The pandemic has affected so many people's finances. There's a lot of people who are struggling with unemployment. What tax questions are you being asked most right now that relate
to so many tax questions? When we all went home to start working at home, I started looking at tax issues, and 2 or 3 I have chased constantly. One is people are asking is, can I get a deduction for a home office? Now that I'm working at home, can I take that deduction? And the answer is yes and no. If you are an employee of a company, you may not have a tax deduction for home office. You may have a deduction for home office. You can have one if you are an independent contractor, self-employed, you have your own business, something like that, but not if you're an employee. But what I tell employees is that your boss can take a deduction for providing you with elements of your home office. So if your boss wants, you need a new office chair, and your company wants to buy you a new office chair or upgrade your internet or something like that, there are, under the rules that apply during the pandemic, there are very generous deductions for that from the employer, and no income to you.
So when we heard about Google, for example, giving all the employees $1,000 to outfit their home offices, was that was part of that deduction?
Yes, that was deductible by Google, and it was not taxable to the employee. Now, one thing that's important here is that Google might have thought about that, because once Google does that for the employee, as I understand it, they can't get the money back. They can't come and take your chair away or your desk or something like that. It's yours, but they did get the deduction for it.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. I also wanted to follow up on that distinction between an employee and somebody who is working for themselves or has their own business. What if you're an employee but you have a side gig?
You can be both. That
Yeah.
means that you're an employee of your company. You have vacation benefits, health insurance, a W-2 or whatever. But you're a statutory, they call that. You're an employee. But then you're on the side, you have your own business. Maybe you do some consulting work for somebody else. Professors often do this. They're an employee of a university, but on the side they write books or they consult or something like that. So that usually goes on Schedule C. And so you could be two things.
And that Schedule C would allow them to then take the home office deduction based on that portion of their income?
Well, yes, but there are rules about how much you can take and how much you work and all that kind of stuff. But yes. If you can have a Schedule C business, you can have all kinds of deductions for all kinds of great things if you have enough income to cover them. You could put extra money into retirement accounts. You can, do something with the home office. It's not that big a deduction. Maybe something with cars and things like that. There are lots of expenses you can take.
If you are worried that today is tax day and you haven't filed, perhaps because you don't have the money right now, what's the best game plan?
Oh, I have something very strong to say about this. Do something today. Do it. The very worst, well, maybe not the very worst, but one of the worst penalties that the IRS levies is for failure to file. Even if you can't pay, you should file your return. Now, it needs to be accurate. If you're racing to do this today, you have two choices. You could file an accurate return, or you could file an extension, a request for an automatic extension, Form 4868. That's Form 4868. It will give you this year until October 15th to send in your paperwork. It does not extend the time that you have to pay your taxes, but there are two penalties: failure to file and failure to pay. And so you would get out under the failure, from under the failure to file penalty. So I really urge that people do something today. Now, it needs to be accurate. But even if you can't pay, go ahead and file. And I do have a story about this in the Wall Street Journal, which is out there. I think it may even be outside the paywall. But,
okay. All right. Yeah. No, I think that's such important advice, because they charge significant penalties.
It could be if you didn't pay $1,000 of taxes for a year, the penalties and interest come to about, $5,000.
Wow.
Excuse me, backwards. If you didn't pay $1,000 for a year, the penalties and interest add about $500.
Gotcha. Okay. But still,
that's higher than a credit card.
Yeah.
What we always say is that the IRS is the most powerful creditor in the United States. Try to take care of your IRS obligations first. If you can't pay everything, pay something. And if you can't pay something, go ahead and file, because you'll keep that penalty off your back.
Are you a fan of the IRS's installment plans, the payment plans?
Well, yes and no. What we say is that if you owe money that you can't pay, try to get it from someplace else, because there's interest and penalties and interest on the penalties at the IRS. If you can, sometimes a credit card, borrow from a relative. This year, there are very generous provisions for borrowing from your 401k if you can pay it back. So that might be a place to look. It's hard to borrow from an IRA, but a 401k savings plan at work, you could probably take a loan. But do pay attention to those IRS obligations. Now, if you need to borrow money from the IRS, there's one plan if you can do it in 3 months, and another plan if it's going to take you longer. And those are all available on the IRS website. They're very easy to set up. You can set up online. It's the fees are low, and that's often much better than going to some service that tells you that they can help you with your tax problems.
Yeah, I'm always wary about those services. Steve, who is watching us, pointed out that he does his own taxes, that he saves a little bit of money each year, a couple $1,000s, by not having a CPA working on them. He also suggests if you're going to send Form 4868 in, that you do it by certified mail today so that you have proof. Can you do that electronically?
Yes, you can file it online, and there's a link on the IRS website for that. But he makes an excellent point. Anytime you communicate with the IRS at all, you should keep a good record. And if you do it by mail on paper, always get a certified mail sticker. And I ask for return receipt requested. The IRS and the courts take those things very, very seriously. And so records are everything, and certified mail stickers, but he is exactly right about that point.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Laura. And Steve, thanks for the information. What do people who are currently on unemployment need to know as it relates to tax implications?
Well, the main thing is, I think, that unemployment is taxable. It's not tax exempt. And so I believe that you can, I'm not an expert on unemployment compensation, but I believe that you can ask for withholding on it. And I think that would be a good thing to do, because you don't want to have the blow of unemployment and the blow of an unexpected tax bill. Now, this would be for next year. Mm-hmm. You know, this is 2020 unemployment income payments. So we're not, and today is about 2019. So keep that in mind. But I think you should keep your taxes in mind when if you're getting unemployment.
Especially because, I mean, I've been reading the facts and figures, and it looks like about 2/3 of the people who've been receiving the additional $600 a week are actually receiving more money from unemployment than they were from their jobs. So
yes.
you don't want to spend more than you actually have to spend.
Yes, that's exactly right. Always keep this in mind.
The stimulus payments, however, that's different, correct? Those were not taxable.
Those are not taxable. That's correct. So you're okay. And maybe if you get another one, that won't be taxable either.
Do you have any insight on whether or not we've got another one coming?
No, I wish I did. My colleagues in Washington are following that very closely, but people in Washington may not know if it's going to happen either. It's very hard to predict what Congress is going to do.
Marianne is asking, Dr. Marianne Campbell is asking, what are the improved rules on borrowing from a 401k? This would be, I guess, under the CARES Act, but let's also talk about borrowing versus withdrawing versus trying to find the money from somewhere else.
Well, I don't have all the details of that in my head, but I can tell you that in general, it's always possible to borrow from a 401k and to pay it back. And often the sponsors make it pretty easy to do that, and it's a good option. This year, as I recall, Congress is allowing you to take out up to $100,000 to borrow, mm-hmm. and to pay it back within 2 or 3 years, I think. So those are very generous terms. I mean, of course, if you can avoid it, if borrowing, it's good to avoid borrowing. But if you have to, the 401k is a good place to get it. If you have to take money out, you will owe, just take it out and never pay it back. You will owe tax plus a 10% penalty if you were under 59 and a half.
The CARES Act, I believe, actually waives the penalty for
the withdrawal.
For the withdrawal under.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Because of the pandemic, yeah.
Yeah. So
But
that's good to know. That makes a big difference.
Well, and it's confusing because I always say, I mean, I can, I've said hundreds of times, don't pull money out of your 401k because, as you said, I mean, it's not a great thing to do. We want people to allow that money to continue to grow. If it's out of the account, you can miss moves in the market, but you're absolutely right that when it comes to owing money to somebody like the IRS, that's going to charge you an arm and a leg. If you don't have an alternative, you have to look at what's palatable.
Well, that's exactly right. And the IRS, by the way, is not like a credit card company. They don't charge you an arm and a leg just to make money off of you. It's that the way that Congress has set it up, there are penalties, and Congress has put those penalties in, not the IRS. And then the interest, which is very, very low right now. It's about 3%, much better than a credit card company. But the interest runs on the penalties and on the amount of tax, so that if you can get the money from someplace else, you won't have interest running on, penalties, and you won't have penalties perhaps either. So.
You mentioned that people who are self-employed have a lot of options when it comes to putting money into retirement. Can we talk about that a little bit? I mean, there's so many tax vehicles out there these days. How do we make the best use of them from a tax perspective?
Well, that's a great question. And it has a really complicated answer, but to make it super simple, I would say that the first thing to think about is a 401k plan. If your employer offers one and has a match, the match is, if you can get that match, that's pretty free money. And you'll probably get to take it with you if you leave the company or, retire. And so the first thing to do is to put in the savings that get you the match. Then you may want to look at IRAs. There are 401ks and Roth 401ks. My employer just put in a Roth 401k. Should we talk about that at all?
Absolutely, because I think there's a lot of confusion about the differences.
A Roth 401k is similar to a Roth IRA. And in a regular 401k, the money goes in pre-tax. You get a nice deduction. But when it comes out decades later, you owe tax at ordinary income rates. It's fully taxable. All the appreciation, all the money you put in. Now, with a Roth account, at least under current law, the money goes in after tax. And it grows tax-free and it comes out tax-free later on, under the rules, 59 and a half, things like that. But that can be good, that can be very useful. And it's always good to have what we call a tax diversified portfolio. Some money that's Roth, some money that's regular, whatever, maybe some in a taxable account with a stockbroker or whatever in stocks. But it's good to have different tax pots of money. Now, how would you know if you should put money into a regular versus a Roth 401k? One answer is how old you are and how much money you're making. If you're at the beginning of your career and your tax rate is really low, then it's, try to put some money into a Roth account. If you're in the middle of or end of your career and your tax rate is really as high as it's ever going to be, maybe you're better off getting that tax deduction up front. And then when somebody retires at, say, 63, 65, 67, and your tax rate drops again, sometimes it's good to be converting money to Roth accounts, in this case, a Roth IRA. But if you have been spreading it out a little bit all the way along, you'll have these choices you can make. Does this make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. We've got a question from an anonymous user about whether anyone can open a Roth.
Well, first of all, if your employer offers a Roth 401k, then you have access to it. And by the way, the match from the employer is always in pre-tax money. It's your money. It's your money that you have a choice about. Now, the question she just asked is about a Roth IRA. And of course, there are complicated tax rules about that. Let's see, there are rules about how much income you can have and still put up to, I think, $6,000 or $7,000 a year in a Roth IRA. Roth IRAs, if you're eligible, you have to have earned income. You can't just put money into one. You have to have some earned income up to the amount you put in, up to $6,000 or $7,000. But they're often great for teenagers or young people. I have known grandparents who are very happy with a grandchild who's got a job, a summer job. And they say, okay, the earnings can be yours, or you need to use them for tuition, but I'm going to match that by putting money into a Roth IRA for you and to get you started on savings. And so, does that answer that question?
Yeah, that can be that. I think that absolutely does. And the other thing with Roths that sometimes take people out of contention, if you're making too much money, there are income limits for a Roth, but you can convert at any time, right? If you've got money in a regular IRA, you can convert.
You can convert, but there's sometimes you don't want to do it. If you don't have the money, it will be a taxable event. You will have to pay tax on the conversion, and if you can't pay that money from outside the account, it's not always a very good idea. And you want to try to convert when your tax rate is lower rather than higher. And I think that the equation is the tax rate going in lower than the tax rate will be coming out. So if you're Mr. Big and you're always going to be in the top tax bracket, it's a very different equation from if you're somebody else who's earning a little now, more later, or more later and less now, if you see what I'm saying. There's some interesting calculators about this online, and we cover it a lot at the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly reading your columns because they're wonderful. I get a lot of great information from them. One of the things I think that really has frustrated people tax-wise in the past few years is if you were used to itemizing, if you were typically used to itemizing under the most recent big portfolio of changes to the tax law, that the standard deduction is much higher, and it no longer makes sense to itemize for a lot of people. Are there strategies that you can use to still get the most out of deductions and credits possible?
Yes, there are. We're talking about the deductions on Schedule A, and where there is play in certain ones of those. Let me see about the best way to talk about this. I think that when they raised the standard deduction, we went from 30% of taxpayers itemizing to 10% of taxpayers itemizing, and that is a very large jump. Where people can strategize the most is with their charitable deductions. So you look at what the itemized deduction, you look what the standard deduction is, which is about $12,000 for a single person and about $2,400 for a married couple. And you look at all your mortgage interest and things like that, and you add them all up and you see where you are. Do you have enough? Have you jumped the hurdle so that you have more than, say, $15,000 if you're single, or $27,000 if you're married? If you don't, then you look at your charitable contributions and you say, what if I gave twice as many every other year, twice as much money every other year? Would that get me over the hurdle? And the answer, or even 3 times as many every 3 years.
Yeah.
With that, and then I would get some value for those deductions instead of they just don't happen. And occasionally people do you talk about donor advised funds on the show?
We haven't, but I think donor advised funds are a terrific tool.
They can be for this. You make one big lump sum contribution to a donor advised fund of whatever, and you take it, you deduct it that year going in, and then you pay it out over many years when you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I have a donor advised fund that I opened. It's actually a lot of fun to
Yes.
because once you've got the money in there, then you feel like you're giving away free money. And I don't, I know it's not free, but
And you feel like a benefactor.
you
It's
do.
wonderful.
Really,
It's
really.
absolutely, it's a lot. It can be a really great thing. There's something that before we stop, there's something I want to get to, which has come up this year that we've never had to deal with before during the pandemic. And that is that we have a lot of people working remotely now. And what is the chance that two states are going to want to tax your income? The one where your job is based and the one where you are working from. And we have written several stories about this, but it's something that people should be aware of and checking on, particularly if they live in high tax states like California or New York or say Massachusetts, Maryland, things like that. If you work at a tech firm in Silicon Valley, but you went home or to your parents' house or grandparents' house, and you've been working from Texas, which has no income tax for months now, and you're actually a Texas resident, is California still going to want to tax you? Or if you've gone to Arizona, which has a tax, will you wind up paying Arizona taxes and California taxes? These are things to talk to your employer about now. It's a very complicated subject, and it's one that's newly relevant.
How much time do you have to spend in these alternate states in order to
taxable?
In order to be taxable? And how do they know?
Well, I'll tell you. The answer is sometimes it's one day.
Really?
They put that in for basketball teams and entertainers and CEOs that go to conferences and things like that. It's a very confusing area, but they do know because for one thing, if you use a tax preparer, he is going to ask you, and he's not going to lie for you on the tax return. Did you spend any time out of state? Do you need to file in two states? That's a really big thing. And then your employer may ask you, where are you working from? What do we need to do about this? And sometimes they can help because they could assign you to an office in Florida, and then you're not paying New York taxes anymore. So it's not that your employer would just be the police, but it's something for people to be paying attention to.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The other change, the other couple of changes I just wanted to quickly touch on that are due to the pandemic. One are required minimum distributions from IRAs.
They have. That's for people who are 72 and older, and they have been suspended for this year. So you just don't have to take one. And if you took one out before we had the law passed, you can put it back in. And I believe the deadline to do that is August 31st. So you should get on it right away. And so that's pretty good news for a lot of people. But you don't want to take out money, especially when markets are down, if you don't have to.
And the other question is about dependent care accounts and flexible spending accounts.
I wrote this story.
Yes, I know.
I'm going to write it again. A lot of dependent care accounts are the problem, mostly because people can often get through their medical flexible spending accounts. But a lot of people put money in those dependent care accounts for camp, and camp is not happening.
Right.
It's maybe $1,000. The bad news, the good news is that you can stop putting the money in. Your employer will let you do that. The bad news is that you can't get that money out. Once it's there, it actually belongs legally to the employer. And there are rules about what they can do with it, so they can't refund it to you. I'm hoping that Congress will, if they pass another stimulus bill, that they'll somehow address this, let people roll it over to next year or something like that. The company doesn't have any say in the law, and neither does the IRS. And so right now that money is tied up. And I'd like to hear from readers and listeners about imaginative ways to use dependent care money if you're not using it for camp.
That's great. We're going to send them your way. Laura Saunders, you are just so full of amazing information. We got a lot of comments from people saying this was incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for this. Where can our listeners go to find more of you?
Well, I write the tax report column at the Wall Street Journal. You can Google my name. Now, the thing is, some of those stories are behind a paywall, so become a subscriber and help me to stay employed. So it's Wall Street Journal, all tax, all the time.
Well, and the Wall Street Journal is such an invaluable resource. I read it every day. I would be lost without it. For anybody who is looking for more information specifically about taxes as it relates to retirement, there is a helpful article up at protectedincome.org, and you can find more there. Laura, I hope that you'll come back, and I hope that I see you sooner than another 30 years.
Yes, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And we'll see you guys all next week. Bye.